Okay, our first speaker today is Maurice, who is the founder of the International Association of Independent Journalists, which is a registered not-for-profit journalist association with offices in Toronto and London. The association caters to amateur and professional journalists with advocacy and support services. And I'll stop there and hand over to Maurice. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for everybody for showing up and the organizers of the sorry. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for showing up and the organizers of the session. Bonjour and greetings to everybody. My name is Maurice, and I am the president of a citizen journalist association called the International Association of Independent Journalists. And in 2012, we produced a survey about citizen journalists called The Status of Citizen Journalists Around the World 2012. And I'm happy to report to you on the findings of that report. This report examined the status of citizen journalists and citizen journalism around the world in the year 2012, their methods of acquiring and disseminating the news, the restrictions they encountered in their practice of journalism, as well as their security issues, and made recommendations on how to support citizen journalism and protect citizen journalists. The report gathered information by survey and submitted articles written by journalists obtained through journalist associations and networking. Our survey had a sample size of 131 responses distributed globally in 56 countries. The survey has a margin of error of 8.7%, and that means that if you ran the survey 100 times, asking a different sample of people each time, the overall percentage of people who responded the same way would remain within 8.7% of the original result in at least 95 of those 100 surveys. The sample size is only pertinent to the global activities of journalists, as the distribution was global in nature and the sample size relatively small. The results of the survey are divided into 4 sections. 1, general information. 2, acquisition of the news. 3, dissemination of the news. 4, security. We'll begin with section 1, general information. First question, are you a professional journalist? 98.5% stated they are not professional journalists and therefore citizen journalists. Only 1.5% of respondents indicated that they made their living from money earned as a journalist. How long have you been a citizen journalist? 85.5% reported less than a year. 13% reported 1 to 5 years, 1% had 5 to 10 years, and 1% had over 10 years. Are you male or female? The actual figures were 58% male and 42% female. How old are you? 66.5% indicated an age between 18 and 30 years old. 19% were 30 to 45 years, 13% 45 to 60, and only 1.5% were over 60 years of age. What is your current occupation? The largest group was students at 34%. Office administration employees were at 32%. Laborers at 15%. And business people, self-employed individuals at 8%. The unemployed came in at 6%, with managerial at 2%, and professional at 3%. Okay, level of education attained. College diplomas were the largest group with 45%. With university degrees at 26%, and high school diplomas at 26%. 2% had master's degrees, and no respondent had a doctorate degree. 1% of respondents had less than a high school diploma. Question, are you associated in any way with a traditional news organization like a Stringer, etc.? 98% said no. Only 2% of respondents indicated some association with traditional news agencies. Even if it is not your primary employment, do you receive compensation for any of your journalistic efforts? 98% said no. Only 2% of respondents got any monetary compensation for their journalism. How many hours per week do you spend on citizen journalist work? 81% spend less than 1 hour per week on journalism. 1 to 10 hours came in at 17%. Only 2% were 10 to 20 hours per week. And no, 0% of respondents worked 20 to 40 or even over 40 hours per week. Okay, section 2, acquisition of the news. Question, which method do you use most in gathering your news? 96% indicated physical attendance at news events. 2% of respondents use traditional broadcast media, and 2% got their news from the internet. Does your status as a citizen journalist hinder your ability to acquire news information? Somewhat came in at 59.5%. Next was a tie between no hindrances and often, each at 19%. 2.5% said yes all the time. Question, is your ability to gather information restricted by internet blocks by the government? 86% said no, with 5% saying sometimes, 6% said often, and 3% said yes all the time. At newsworthy events, is your ability to videotape, photograph, or audio record restricted or prohibited by the authorities? No restrictions were the most common response at 72%. Somewhat was at 16%, with often at 10%, and only 2% said yes all the time. Okay, section 3, dissemination of the news. Question, how do you predominantly disseminate your articles or commentary? The most popular method of dissemination was the internet at 96%. Newspapers and newsletters came in at 1.5%, with community meetings at 0% and other types at 2.5%. Community college radio or television had 0% responses. If the internet is used, what is your primary website or internet tool used to disseminate information? Email was most popular at 31%. The personal blog came in at 27%. Next was the personal website at 13%. Social media sites came in with Facebook.com at 10%, Twitter.com at 7.5%, and YouTube.com at 6%. Other social sites had 5.5% of responses. Is your ability to disseminate information restricted by internet blocks by the government? 88% said no. 4% of respondents reported that sometimes they had problems, and 5% reported that internet blocks affected them often. 3% reported that internet blocks restricted the dissemination of their information all the time. Are there any censorship laws in your area that hinder your freedom in journalism? 88% said no, while 12% said yes. Okay, section 4, security. Do you fear for your safety because of the police presence at events? Most common reply was somewhat at 44%. No came in at 31.5%. Often was at 17.5%. And all the time, a major concern had 7% of responses. Question, do you fear for your safety in news gathering because of your government? Largest response was no at 62.5%. Next was somewhat at 25%. Often had 8.5%. And all the time, a major concern had 4%. Do you fear for your safety in news gathering because of corruption or organized crime? The largest response was no at 62.5%. Next was somewhat with 23%. Often had 7.5%, while all the time a major concern was 7%. Do you fear for your safety in news gathering because of social or religious concerns? 66.5% said no fear. Next was somewhat at 26%. Often was at 7.5%. And all the time a major concern was 0%. Question. How do you react to fears or obstacles in your work as a citizen journalist? Avoid the news events had the largest response at 47%. 37.5% said it had no effect, and 15.5% said they would continue but take precautions. Question. Do you take any measures to protect yourself as you perform your work as a citizen journalist? Largest response was no at 88.5%, with yes at 11.5%. Have you ever received threats or were intimidated or pressured in any way due to your work as a citizen journalist? 91% said no, while 9% said yes. Have you ever been arrested or detained covering a newsworthy event as a citizen journalist? 98.5% said no, only 1.5% answered yes. Have you ever been beaten, injured by authorities while covering newsworthy events as a citizen journalist in your country? 95.5% answered no. 4.5% of the respondents reported that they had been beaten or injured by authorities while covering newsworthy events. Okay, general observations and conclusions. From the articles, we learned that the advantages of citizen journalism are many. Anyone can be a citizen journalist, and since citizen journalists are everywhere, they can report on many news stories with supplied media and content almost immediately. Citizen journalists mention regularly their problems of getting access to news events through traditional news media and their concern for their safety at news events, because they do not have the presence of traditional full-time reporters. Because of their heavy reliance on the internet, they worry about censorship and barriers to news acquisition and dissemination of their information. In conclusion, there is a place and desire for citizen journalism, especially if they have the same access and protections of traditional journalism, as the two forms of journalism could work together for each other's benefit. But all this can continue if we have a free internet without filters or blocks to prevent dissemination of information or acquisition of information. The internet needs to remain free so that all opinions are able to have a hearing in the minds of citizens with regards to any news event or issue. All voices need to be heard for individuals to have the information to make informed decisions or choices and ultimately self-determination. Citizen journalism and an open internet will help ensure this. Now, I'll just quickly go through a few recommendations.
Very quickly.
Yeah. One, it is recommended that the concept of citizen journalists continue to be formalized and institutionalized in the same way as traditional journalism. Two, that citizen journalists be afforded the same rights of access as those in traditional media. Three, some measure of protection should be given to citizen journalists at news events. Four, some form of collaboration between citizen journalists and traditional news reporting media should be encouraged. And finally, with 96% of citizen journalists in our study relying on the internet for dissemination of their information, it is recommended that all affected stakeholders continue to monitor and lobby relevant organizations to keep the internet free of censorship and other barriers to information and of acquisition and or dissemination. That's it.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Yep.
Right. In a slight, thank you very much, Maurice.
In a slight change.
What did I make of the session? Well, the speech didn't go without incident. There were a couple of issues. One being that I was speaking so fast that the French interpreter actually came down to tell me to slow down so that she could properly interpret what I was saying to the French people in the audience. After all the opening speeches, there was a question and answer segment where IAIJ actually got to shine.
We have produced our own newspapers, magazines. We've put documentaries on mainstream TV nationwide for less than it cost us to do our little newsletter, like $1,000 coast to coast in Canada after Saturday Night Live, or daytime programming, which is about 10% of a person's annual salary that can be combined with other people if need be. Citizen journalists are not necessarily wedded to the internet, and you're going to see them branch out into more and more areas traditionally inhabited by professional journalism. Sorry.
Not sorry. Thank you. Maurice, you had an interesting question there about questions of institutionalization, human rights, and so forth.
Yeah, with regards to the first question, by formalizing and institutionalizing the term citizen journalist,